Home, right? Because we are still planning to publish, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, so it could be published here, so you would get the details. Now I would just show you an abstract, and I would make my presentation in a broader sense about the immigration to the States and somehow a historiographic perspective of immigration to the States. So it will be much broader than my article simply, but it would give you some insight to it. So here we go, we start from the article. So I show you the abstract, or read it aloud, and then I will move to my presentation, okay? Okay, hopefully it works on my computer. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Okay, I think now it works. What about now?
Not really.
Not really.
Irina Balya has been very polite and diplomatic. See?
Diplomatic. Yeah.
Diplomatic.
Now it works.
And now?
Yes, just perfect. Now it works.
Just perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the title of my article is From Eastern European Rooted Immigrant Circle to the Mainstream of American Culture, and Альфред Казін's transition. And it's simply tracing the process of immigrant transition. So while tracing the process of immigrant transition, it appears that in the 20th century, children of Eastern European, mainly Jewish immigrants, were trying to get rid of the European past of their parents as quickly as possible in order to take the full advantage of American culture. This attitude brought serious changes in family values, social ties, and religious traditions among immigrants' children, which was vividly presented in Kazin works. So moving straight toward the American future often meant leaving the old world, heritage, and language behind. And many of the immigrant children regarded this type of attitudes as another logical step in their development. But although this incorporation into the mainstream of American culture was fruitful, some of them experienced a deep sense of irreversible loss over their past. And in this or in some other works, I would simply discuss this article, some other articles, I would discuss a kind of individual immigrant experience or individual experience of being rooted or coming from immigrant families. So it's about an American intellectual or intellectuals, old world, new world, about different identity in a new language, acquiring new culture, education, and some places. And now I would move to my presentation. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Which covers immigration and assimilation in the United States here. So we would start from the famous The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, the sonnet, but children of Portuguese Jewish immigrants. I mean, a kid, Emma as a kid, came to America with parents, and she wrote, as a grown-up person, she wrote this sonnet, so which you could read here, and I will proceed, and then you will see where it was placed. So this Statue of Liberty here is not a coincidence, but is here in this picture. So you could just browse the text if you wish, putting an impact on the 6 or 7 last lines, like give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these the homeless tempest toast to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door, right? And well, this is not exactly how it all started, but this is how it sums up the immigration process to America and sums up the expectations of people immigrating to America. And now let us see, let's say from Adam and Eve, how it all started, bearing in mind that immigration was a central aspect of US history, was and is. The major reason why the population grew, hopefully, to 330 million by 2020, because now we know that borders are closed, right? So the immigration flow may somehow be stopped. But well, most of the people were attracted by the beliefs in American dream, and that led millions of them to come to live in the USA. And over the centuries of massive immigration, the struggles of newcomers made it hard for Americans to adjust to each other. The view that the nature of the nation was and should be a composite of many national backgrounds, races, and cultures gained popular acceptance. And this view continues to face the opposition of the people who believe that the newcomers should leave their homeland cultures behind to hold the country and its increasingly diverse population together. So called the new colossus, right? For Americans, their core was idealism and pride, which are embodied here in this the new colossus, which is displayed inside the base of the Statue of Liberty. So let's look here. So if you want a solid version, right, Statue of Liberty, and here, if you want a solid version, so a bronze version of Emma Lazarus' sonnet is here, right? And somehow all those immigrants coming through this, so to say, golden door were able to pass this statue and the sonnet. And, well, proceeding, the contacts, conflicts, and mixings of cultures have fueled widespread discrimination, economic exploitation, anti-foreign movements, and debates over equality, opportunity, and national identity. And actually, this was, in the beginning, I mean, beginning of a huge immigration flow, like late 19th century. And it is so, now, actually. In a country whose history began with the clash of Native Americans and European colonies and continued through the importation of African slaves and several waves of immigrants, there has never been a single national culture. So melting pot, salad bowl, and the stew, these are the names that we've been trying to call themselves, I mean Americans, yet they don't know how to call themselves because none of these nowadays seems to be appropriate. But, well, so in this sense, we are coming to the problems that contemporary America, contemporary United States face. So Americans disagree over the nature of the process and what the ultimate goal should be: the integration, assimilation, or even homogenization of newcomers, or the acceptance of permanently pluralistic society. And actually, this is a sort of what Huntington would name a clash of civilization here. So in a sense of United States, because he wrote about broader sense of clash of civilization as a kind of West versus the rest, but it's also a sort of clash of ideas, how this country should look like. It is still not resolved. Problem, but is not resolved. And let's look at some big data. Let's look at some statistics. So, as you see, the foreign-born population had its peak in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, so-called glided age in American history. So before the First World War, which was called the Great War at that time, and then a steady float down, actually. So decrease, and then since 1980s and 90s, a huge decrease, so that it's more or less immigration-born population is it near, or maybe it is even in its historic high. So now once again, this immigration, this percentage of immigrant people is more than 10% of population, which means, like, if we have 330 million Americans, it's like 10%, it's over a 30, and even more than, it's over 30%. I mean, 30 million people, it's really a lot now. So somehow we can understand why some of American politicians or some Americans are so worried about this, right? And now let's move on with some, let's say, not move on, but let's start with the beginnings, so from Adam and Eve. So let's quickly browse through history because, well, as all of us know, it started, I mean, the story of America started somewhere. Well, it started from Amerigo Vespucci, who somehow gave the name America, but it's not just Amerigo Vespucci, it's just the age of discoveries. So started with Magellan, with Christopher Columbus, with many other adventurers, but were simply hired by foreign governments, we would say nowadays, or foreign crowns at that time, just to enter the new world. So the story of American immigration, the story of America started somewhere after the Columbus, right? Well, Native Americans are not eager to say that Columbus discovered America. He simply sailed to America, but everything started with those explorers and settlers, first settlers to native, and it was as early as the late 1400s, but as far as Northern America is concerned, like 100 years later. And these encounters was actually a huge collision of the worlds and a huge clash of civilization. I think the very first one in modern times, I mean not modern times, but in modern era, let's say, that we had. So this clash between those, because I like to remind you that the very first people, those conquistadors, they believed that they are a kind of exceptional people coming to discover a new savage land. They turned out to be like both like Coronado or Francisco Pizarro, and they happened to be an exceptional idiot, like ужасный idiot, right? And mass murderers, actually, but they believed they were the rulers of the world. And this is how it all started. But so American contacts with other continents had been so rare that before the Columbus or before those conquistadors, but even plants, animals, diseases, and human societies evolved into different forms. So yes, that's why probably we used and we still use terms the new and the old world, right? So Europeans and Native Americans caught diseases from each other. Europeans survived the first contacts better, but most of the 17th century population, simply American native population, they died. So like Native Americans feared those epidemics, but destroyed them. And actually, it's not just destroying some people, just destroying cultures like Mayas, Incas, like Aztecs. So their population shrunk, right? 5 million, and then you would have 2 million, and then less than 1 million, right? And Europeans seem to look alike to Native Americans, so like, and vice versa, I would say. And most Europeans seem incapable of seeing Native Americans as anything but a single people. So to Europeans, Native Americans seems lazy, wasteful, and the main focus in conflicts between these continental culture systems has been land ownership. I mind you that Native Americans did not understood how ones have something in its own, right? So how can you own a land? The concept of property was something absolutely, not understood by the locals. And then, well, some data about the beginnings, right? So the Spanish were first, followed by the Portuguese, so 1950s, I mean 1500s and 1600s. But the English and French followed, and the first here permanent settlement was famous Jamestown, so 1607. Lord Baltimore established colony in Maryland as a safe haven for Catholics. And a lot of English noblemen, aristocrats, financed Georgia and Carolinas and some other places because, well, this actually English settlement differed substantially from what we knew from the Spanish or the Portuguese, because it was under the guidance of the crown, but it was somehow a private settlement financed by the local local people. And another separate story was a small group, both disenteers or pilgrims, so simply a group of radical separatists from Church of England that founded those colonies in what is now New England, so northern colonies in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So they boarded a ship called Mayflower, and after a few weeks or actually months of the voyage, they found themselves in America. And now some data. So it's more or less like that. So so-called Tidewater Settlement, because as you see, everything was on a seashore or connected with the rivers here. Potomac River, Delaware River, South Hudson River, Roanoke River, James River, etc., on seashore. So Tidewater Settlement. So everything started here. So. And Puritans established their colony in Massachusetts Bay, so-called Massachusetts Bay Company. Dutch and Swedish people were opening something which was known as New Netherlands and New Amsterdam, which is now New York, so which is now New Jersey State and State of New York. And Pennsylvania as a kind of exceptional place founded by Quakers, who was the very first private colony as a whole. So William Penn was like a sole proprietor of a colony which was bigger than Poland and Ukraine joined together. I mean, as far as population, I mean, as far as the area was concerned. So, a single person as a proprietor of a colony like Poland, Ukraine, and Belarusia joined together. So, well, a huge piece of land. And now it's the first wave. So first wave of immigration was more or less Anglo-American, so somehow homogeneous, right? So somehow this was a homogeneous. But some so-called middle colonies were a bit more diverse. Some Roman Catholics came, but still, so something that was from the 17th century till American War for Independence, so more or less English people here. And of course, French in the north and Spanish in the south, but a separate story. So, and the slaves were here, right? The slaves brought to America by royal charters, so Royal African Slave Company was bringing slaves, and it's like from 100,000 it rose to millions, and nowadays the descendants of the slaves, African Americans, comprise of a tenth of America, 10% of American population as a whole. And then Scottish Irish people were coming, and then some Germans coming. So now it was not so diverse as it used to be in the beginning, and now you see a kind of graphic representation of how people were just boarding a ship to America, right? So tons of people just sailing to the unknown. And this first wave somehow started to transforming the demographic picture, demography of the colonies. And this first, the English dominance was somehow decreased from 4/5 to just less than a half or around a half. And a lot of African American slaves, especially present in southern colonies. So America, before just establishing its state, so just on the verge of its independence, 1776, so just declaring its independence, was just in its beginning was starting to be a diverse place. And now we move to the 19th century. Where actually 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, that's the times where most of contemporary Americans could discover their roots. So, two industrial revolutions actually. The one that came to America a bit later, because in the beginning of the 19th century, and the other one that was right on time, that made America superpower, was here. And the Industrial Revolution meant that people were needed. And so a huge horde of 60 million people who left their homelands between 1820 and 1930. And most of those people who living the old world settled in the USA. So a vast number of people, and of course diverse people, ethnically and religiously diverse here. So it was not that homogeneous as in the beginnings. And funny thing, but maybe not many people know, but if we look at descendants of nowadays, let's say white Americans, so most of them are rooted in German ancestry, not British, not Irish, not Scandinavian, or of course not French, but in the German. So like half of this white people, white Americans, if we can use politically correct this term, half of them have nowadays German origin. So, and it's all rooted in the 19th century here. And now I would show you some infographics. So could you please just look at it, because this would tell you how the population changes. I mean, the number of immigrants and the places of origin changes according to the years here. So just look at this. So years pass, centuries pass, and look at the names here. Instead of the name of a state, you would have a name of immigrants' places of origin, right? That tells you that throughout the history till 1980s or 1990s, this would be Europe. But now this would be Mexico, or so-called Latin or Central America, and Asia, if you look at it once again, right? Here we go. You would also see Russia here probably, or USSR.
Yes, that's what I noticed.
Which could be misleading, because statistics are somehow dull. They simply use official names. So if they say USSR or Russia, it's probably Russians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, people from Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, etc., Georgia, Armenia. So it's not just the Russians, but Russia is in the statistics here, of the Soviet Union, USSR here. Okay, let's move on. And so-called patterns and nativism. Immigrants found many economic niches, much of somehow being domestic servants, mill and factory workers, miner, lodgers, sailors, fishermen, and building workers. Of course, we are still in the 19th century here, or beginning of the 20th century. So, so nowadays it differs, but and white and Protestant Scandinavians had a sort of language problems. Maybe that is why even nowadays they say that there is a dialect called Pennsylvania Dutch, for instance. When they use word Dutch for people from Scandinavia, which is misleading, because Dutch should be people from the Netherlands, but they usually say Dutch about all those people of Scandinavian origin, including Dutch people, including people from the Netherlands, so like Danish, Norwegians, Finnish or Swedish people, but also them. And more or less, they would tell you that different nationalities were known for different, let's say, advantages and disadvantages that they brought with them. Like Germans were welcome for their technical knowledge and industry, right? And admired for culture that was Europe's one. well, but also some stereotype, right? So some people were known, like Irish or Scottish, especially Irish in the beginning, and then it was passed to Polish people, Russian people, Ukrainian people. So some were known as, let's say, not so sophisticated or cultural people, but still we are in the stereotypes, right? So let's not treat it as a kind of Bible. But these were the Irish, the very first immigrants that came in numbers, and Irish came in numbers in the 19th century because of the very nasty situation called by the British rule, so-called the Potato Famine. So they simply created such a hunger in Ireland, I mean the British landlords and the British kings, more or less the same what Stalin did in Ukraine, like Holodomor, right? So the British did something to Irish people, something like that, but somehow maybe Stalin was a kind of taking up for what he learned from the British, but well, more or less. But maybe that's why the Irish were the first, and then the Chinese. But the Irish were the first to be mocked or dirty. So they were referred to often as dirty, violent drunks, right? And they were Catholic, whereas most of people coming from Scandinavia, Britain, or even Germany, they were not Catholic. So Germany, as you know, is a mixed country. Southern lands are Catholic, like Baden-Württemberg or like Bayern, Bavaria, right? But still, those immigrants were actually from northern part of Germany, which was Protestant. So Protestant versus Catholics here. So the first kind of clash of civilization in America. And then these were these Chinese who were actually hardworking people building roads and railways. These were the first to be somehow badly treated. And anti-foreign agitation reached its first peak in 1850s as the population of the USA increased. So along with the anti-Catholicism, so-called the Know-Nothing or American Party believed that not only the Irish with loyalty to the Pope in Rome, but also all non-British immigrants threatened this precious heritage, and so proposed tripling the time needed to gain the US citizenship and restricting immigrants' voting rights. So as early as 1850s, right? And some internal and external factors caused the civil war, but actually diffused this movement. And right after the Civil War, this was this famous Chinese Exclusion Act, which excluded Chinese or ended Chinese immigration for at least 50 years. So it looks like that. And now we are somehow close to what we may be interested in. So late 1990s and 1930s, a crucial moment in American history, because here America somehow emerged in the new century, I mean the 20th century, after the First World War and then after the second one, just 10 years later, in 1940s, emerged as a sole hegemon, or one of the hegemons, or maybe it's a sole hegemon in the world, and due to workforce, but actually came from abroad. So this was not Russia, this was not the British Empire, but simply somehow ceased to exist in the 20th century, but this was the America as a sole hegemon. So this immigration from Northwestern Europe was declining, and newcomers were like 4 out of 5 people, so-called new immigrants between 1890 and 1914, so till the Great War, so-called, was actually from Eastern and Southern Europe. So these were Italians, Jews, Poles, Hungarians, Mexican, Russians, Czech, Greeks, Portuguese, or even Syrians, Japanese, or Filipinos, so some Southeast Asia here. Once again, Russians, it's probably connected with all the inhabitants, all of the inhabitants of so-called Russian Empire at that time. So, so even, I think, not just Ukrainian, Belarusians, but even some Poles, which were living not in the Kingdom of Poland or not in Galicia, which belonged to Austria-Hungary, were treated as Russians. So this is what statistics say. But here we go. This is the part of Europe that we are from, the part of Europe we are interested in, a huge influx of immigrants here. And, well, once again, some religious language issues, and especially connected with people from our cultural, let's say, sphere or cultural dimension, so Slavic people. So they seem somehow, well, so to say, exotic for them, right? So the scale of the new immigration and the altered job market resulted in larger urban immigrant quotas than Americans had ever seen. Crime, overcrowding, in sanitary conditions, and epidemics in immigrant ghettos had caused alarm and reforms before the Civil War and after. And reformers somehow established some settlement houses, etc., and charities to help those immigrants. And they wanted to deal something with those ghettos. Perhaps I could mention two books. One was a scientific study, Tomasz and Znaniecki, Polish peasant in America, and the other was a novel by Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, entitled The Jungle. So this scientific work by Znaniecki, by Tomasz and Znaniecki, and this novel by Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, would give you a good insight of American urban ghettos of late 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, where life was really harsh. Maybe let's move to the Quota Act here. So the National Quota Act represented so-called the climax of a campaign for restriction that achieved its first result in 1875 when the federal government began a sort of listing of those banned groups, but also it's not just convicts, prostitutes, lunatics, idiots, and so on and so on. Okay, we should put brackets here, of course, or even polygamists, right? Or political radicals like anarchists were excluded from immigration. There was this movie, well, I forgot the title, starring Marion Cotillard. Let me see if I have it somewhere. Yes, I have it. It's entitled Immigrant, starring Marion Cotillard and Joaquin Phoenix. It's about a Polish girl coming to America and becoming a sexual worker here. So it's a sort of sad story, but tells you about a lot about immigrants' life here. Okay, it's brilliantly starred by Marion Cotillard here. Okay, and now let's look what quota system did to the immigration. So 320, and then a huge downfall in immigration after those national quotas. Quotas were somehow connected with hemispheres. So the world was divided into continents, and every hemisphere was given, every continent was given a quota. And at that time, when they established the system, late 1990s and beginning of 1920s, and the end of Gilded Age, so just before the Great War, the most people coming to, majority of people coming to America were of European origin, because European countries or Europe got the most quota system places, let's say, or ranks. And then the word changed. Some people say that this, Great War, later known as the First World War, was a suicide for Europe, but we knew. So, well, Habsburg Empire, right? Russian Empire and Kaiser, German Kaiser, was out, and Germany, Russia, sailing into the unknown, right? Which would lead to another war within 20 years. But at that time, America was having a pretty isolationist, approach, which was contrary to President Wilson, who in his 13 points somehow wanted America to be more and more responsible for the world and European affairs, and creating the League of Nations was like, which America never took advantage of. So was actually Russia, and so was actually Soviet Union then, and so was actually Germany under Hitler, that withdraw from the League of Nations. But this Quota Act, Emergency Quota Act, well, could help some newcomers, but a general approach was that this immigration was somehow, maybe not stopped, but somehow altered in a negative sense of the word here. And then we would have the crash and depression after the Roaring Twenties. So Americans once again wanted to stop this mass immigration because they were somehow in trouble. And it was a shameful thing because late 30s and 40s, they were people who were refugees, trying to escape from Europe, but was about to disintegrate or fall into a total bloodshed, right? Because of what Hitler and Stalin did. And it was a shameful story because hundreds, thousands of people, including, as you see, 20,000 Jewish children, were not allowed. They were sent to Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, even India, but they were not allowed to enter the American shore. So no lamp, let's say, at the Golden Door. So the lamp was somehow dimmed, or I don't know, the lamp faded away.
Faded away.
Faded away for them. So they were not allowed to come to the States. And then after the Second World War, we had a lot of POWs. And here America was POWs and people, some displaced person connected with some displaced people connected with concentration camps, prisons, or simply people who had to escape. Like many Polish people, for instance, who had no choice because Poland was occupied by Stalin, by the Soviet Union, and a lot of Polish people decided not to go back. So POWs, former military personnel, a lot of people were trying to enter America. Here, America was a bit more generous, let's say, for Europeans. And by some acts of Congress, 100,000 or even more displaced person could arrive at the American shore. And then the Cold War started, and some Cold War refugees from communist countries were also allowed. And then some people from Hungary, after the uprising that ended in bloodshed because Soviet tanks simply entered Hungary here. And Cuba, when communists took over, and then Vietnam, of course, after the war. And then Lyndon Johnson and JFK, so we are in 1960s. And now we have this, 1960s issues. Another immigration act that was a sort of new approach. Once again, hemispheric limit, but the quotas were let's say more just. I mean, not that everything was given to people of European origin, but it was somehow a bit more just, I would say. So the system of preferences was different, so was different a bit. And it was in action throughout 1670s till the 80s. And since that time, since LBJ and JFK times, we would say about this, fourth wave. Probably nowadays we would think after September 11, or nowadays we could think about another wave. I don't know. Let's leave it to the historians. But this was the fourth and the last wave so far as we use it in our terminology. So started here and ended up somewhere after September 11 or around September 11, let's say. But this changed in 1990s, okay? Because the highest immigration of American history, but here we wouldn't have so many people from Europe. They were people of Latin or Latino, so-called Mexicanic or Hispanic origin, as they say, Hispanic. It's, well, not exactly right, because Hispanic people, they are also people from Brazil, which are not Hispanics, right? Because they are of Portuguese origin. And now look at the statistics here, okay? We have statistics from 1960s and more or less current statistics, right? So you would have people from European origin and so-called USSR residents, right? So different people, different citizens of USSR, of different national backgrounds. And then look at more or less current statistics, right? So it's simply Latino Central America, or even if we say Mexicans, then it will be Northern America, actually, if you would like to be correct as far as geography is concerned. And we would have Southeast Asia, like Koreans, Vietnamese, or I don't know, Cambodians, Laotans, or Burmese people. So here we go. And large majority of both legal and illegal immigrants are similar to those who have arrived since the 1820s. So in the 1960s and early 70s, huge groups of people fled Southeast Asia. We have to remember, so they went to the US via some air bridge mainly because of the Vietnam War. Yeah. And now we more or less come from what we started from the beginning, so from the 18th century, that was so important, to the contemporary times. So, well, large majorities that used to be or were Irish, Catholics, and Jews, right? They earlier suffered from widespread discrimination, but now they are in the mainstream of America. Mainstream of American culture. My article is about a person, Альфред Казін, a kid of Jewish origin, a children of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, who became a notable figure in America, a notable American intellectual, and his son nowadays is a notable American intellectual. So these people that were somewhere, let's say, on the verge of American society, these groups are now in the core of American society. But and even Chinese or Japanese people, so those descendants of Asian origin that were so ill-treated during the war, are now in the mainstream. But new groups like Puerto Ricans, Vietnamese, Haitians, and of course Mexicans are coming. A large number of Asians and Latinos, right? And the fact that their popular somehow attitudes differ substantially, because they have put emphasis on respect for parents, education, hard work. Well, it's nothing new, right? But still, those people differ substantially from the original, let's say, immigrants, if we may use the term original. Okay, let's look at the statistics once again. So here what is here, right? Mexico, China, India, Filipinos, Puerto Rico. So you see, it's Southeast Asia or even India, or Mexico or Latin American countries, right? Can't spot Europe here. I can spot Canada, people of European origin, closely tied with Britain. On the United Kingdom, and some Germans somewhere just in the end of this, you know, Serbia in the end of this chart here. Okay, what's the contemporary debate? Because, well, you see the wall here. We will think about the wall now because, well, if you remember the previous statistics that I showed to you, the influx of immigrants, it's more than 10% of the society. Well, it is worrying for many Americans, including the current president of the USA, regardless whether we considered him as a positive or negative figure, but well, it's worrying. It would be worrying, I think, for any person to be a president here. So we have Hispanics here. We have some illegals, mainly from Mexico, but also people from China, but Africa, right? Especially during Obama term in office, a lot of emphasis was put on Africa, so people from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and many, Zambia, Rhodesia, I mean not Rhodesia, but Zimbabwe, many other, South Africa, many other, Nigeria, Congo, and many other places people were entering America. And 1980s, some Reform and Control Act, the quota system is somehow rearranged. And now Europe is not in the lead here in 1980s. And a lot of people are accepted as legal immigrants. So a lot of illegals are accepted. This was the story of 1980s. This was the story of 1990s, a sort of amnesty for illegals. And they were accepted as American citizens, but it may not be the story now. So what's going on now since 90s, after September 11 and exactly now? Well, 1990s, they were more liberal. So a lot of people were given immigrant visas, and a lot of asylum seekers were accepted, right? Some attitudes were changed when a Republican took over Congress and President Clinton was stopped for broadening this, you know, illegal immigration or just accepting illegal immigrants. And then another problem with September 11, right, after the terrorist attack, in response to this, government tried to control some immigration in changing some of the rules or providing biometric passports. And this Patriot Act changes something, right? Biometric identity here. And some foreign-born people were under government surveillance, and especially those of Muslim origin, like from Arab countries, or Arab Americans, right? And this was the end of George W. Bush in office and the beginning of Obama, where they somehow tried to pass some bills connected with stopping illegal immigration, but from one side, but on the other side, trying to somehow legalize or give an amnesty to those who were here, right? And it continued throughout Obama administration. But now we have a new president, it's Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump. And as you know, he is not so eager to allow immigration here. Because he promised to build this famous wall, he promised to deport those immigrants. So he signed some executive orders which were somehow blocked by the Congress because the Supreme Court ordered part of those regulations null and void, which somehow blocked this to some extent. But so what he did was simply his executive orders somehow strengthened border security control and internal controls of the immigrants. So people who are illegal immigrants, now they face instant deportation. It's not possible for them to wait for the deportation as a free citizen and a free person. They are arrested and deported, or they are being arrested and waiting for deportation. Because, well, Trump's hallmark promise was this wall, right? This famous wall, because, well, it applies not just to Mexican citizens, but all of Latin Americans, all of the Hispanics trying to come to America. And another promise was to prohibit, and this one is more or less successful, to prohibit citizens of some Muslim countries. Nowadays it's like 7 countries, to enter America unless they are highly needed professionals. But still, it's not known whether this ban would, it's a sort of temporary ban. It's not known whether this would be forever, because of the Congress, which is against, ruled by Democrats, and because of the Supreme Court actions. Ruth Ginsburg, which is the notable head of the US Supreme Court, is pretty much, I think, against the ban. And the Supreme Court position in American justice system is exceptional. And now let's almost end up with some statistics before Trump and after Trump. So you see the downfall, and then once again it's going up. It's going up. And it's almost the end of my presentation. It's almost the end, because I found something additional today, which I wasn't planning to show you, but I will show it to you. I will share it with you, but something that haunts me. These are the photos of some immigrants, because, well, I gave you the statistics, I gave you the historiographic view here, but my article is still about a person or about a people, because I refer to some other people, and in some other articles I refer to some other American intellectuals of immigrant origin. So still, but what I presented was here was a historiographic view, some statistics, but still these are people. So let me show you some photographs and comments upon them, and this would be the end of my presentation. So let me just find the photo. Let me find the photos here, because they are somehow gone. Oh, they are here. Can you read the title?
Yes.
Color portraits of immigrants at Ellis Island, because these were black and white photos, but were somehow colored. I will show you to them. So, like, out of 12 million people, some of them were portrayed by some unknown photographers, and then they are available both black and white and color. And I do believe, you know, that those faces, but I will show to you. Let's look at them, okay? Let's browse them. Browse the faces from different hemispheres and different origins. I'll show it to you. But I do believe, you know, those faces are somehow like time capsules, okay? And the fate of those people, their families, but also the fate of their descendants. So the current Americans, right, is somehow, they are rooted somehow here, so their fate is somehow written in here, because it's like, look, it's like time capsules. And these were real people, and they probably have their families, children, then children had children, etc., right? And by arithmetic orders, there are hundreds of thousands of descendants of those people who are now American citizens, right? And as far as I remember, Nabokov in his Speak Memory, because Nabokov was even a Greek priest here. And as far as I remember in his Speak Memory, he said something like, but you may lose your immortality when you lose your memory, right? So if you lose memory of those pictures of your descendants, you may not be immortal, right? So let's look at those, let's look at those people, right?
So this one guy might be from Ukraine.
Which one?
The above one. Just a little bit below. Yeah, this one.
Okay. Albanian soldier.
Yeah, I can't read, but
because these are people from all over the world. Guadeloupean woman, right? Because on your left here you have the inscription telling you who are there actually. A Bavarian person, right? So as you see, remembrance here, like Rembrandt, is dark but festive, as I would quote Nabokov here, because they are somehow black and white, dark, but you would still remember them, right? And you would still think or imagine what happened to them, to their families, to their descendants, right? So our imagination could fly now with Cossack people, right? You have Cossack people here even, or a girl from Alsace, Lorraine. So a Strasbourg region here. So European Parliament is here. So maybe this girl was born somewhere where the European Parliament was built in later on, right? Who knows? But so you see, that's the story of immigrants in the statistics, story of immigration rooted in some American intellectuals, and then this story, but is somehow like in those pictures, like as I said before, as I had told you before, like a time capsule, a picture like a time capsule of immigrant and their fate. Okay, and I think this is it as far as I am concerned. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for such a profound and detailed report on the generations of immigrants. And I believe that we all have got a lot to think about, and maybe to redefine a little bit our attitude and opinion with regard to the events happening right now in the United States, because obviously there are also immigrant roots in all these political and social issues that the US are facing right now. Thank you very much. Any questions? So I believe that we all need time to think about this presentation, and maybe in some closing discussion session, we'll go back to it and we'll discuss a little bit more detail about it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
All right, now moving on. According to our program, the next presenter has to be Associate Professor Тетяна Бондар, Леся Українка, Eastern European National University, Applied Linguistics Department, and the title of the presentation is Bilingualism, Reasons, Types, and Level of Competence in Languages. Welcome, Tetiana.
Good afternoon. Okay, so I try to give to be very short. So the term bilingualism is an ambiguous term, but the most general definition of bilingualism is the ability of an individual or the members of the community to use two languages effectively. As it has been today mentioned already, that speaking about languages, first of all, we think not only about languages, but we also think about cultures. So nowadays, more than half of the world's population is bilingual or even multilingual. According to statistics, 56% of the Europeans are bilingual. 35% of Canadians and 17% of Americans are bilingual. In the world, approximately from 5,000 to 7,000 languages are spoken, but there are only 200 sovereign states. So if you calculate, we may say that there are approximately 25 to 35 languages per state. Thus, communication among the citizens of many of the world's countries requires extensive bilingualism, if not multilingualism. David Crystal, a prominent British linguist, estimates that 2/3 of the world's children grow up in a bilingual environment. The statistics that Crystal has gathered indicate that approximately 6,000 million people worldwide who speak English are bilingual, and over 41% of them speak one more language, English plus one more language. So there are different types of bilingualism, and there are different classifications of bilingualism. So I just want to mention a few of them because there are different criteria, of course. So first of all, we distinguish between individual bilingualism and societal bilingualism. Societal bilingualism is a characteristic feature of a group of people or community of people, and sometimes these people are located on a definite or certain territory. If you take Ukraine, in central or in eastern parts of Ukraine, we can observe Ukrainian-Russian bilingualism, while in the western part of Ukraine, we can observe Ukrainian-Polish, sometimes Ukrainian-Hungarian or Ukrainian-Romanian bilingualism. So there are a lot of advantages of being bilingual, but maybe in our country, their language policy is a little bit different. And if we speak about two languages, especially Ukrainian and Russian languages that coexist in Ukraine, we cannot speak that it is a positive process because two languages do not develop in harmony. Sometimes one language is advancing at the cost of the other. Okay, so mentioning some other types of bilingualism, we can speak about early, late bilingualism. We can speak about people who are completely bilingual, who are nearly or almost bilingual, or people who are double semilingual. No, and so on. So first, I'm not going to enumerate all classifications of bilingualism. Just to find out what young people think about being bilingual and about their language proficiency, we conducted an experiment. We interviewed a few foreign students who study at Ukrainska National University in Ukraine, and students who foreign students who study at Pope John Paul II State High School in Poland. They were asked a few questions about bilingualism, about native language, about first language, and about second language. The first question that we asked was about whether they consider themselves to be a bilingual person or just a person who knows a few languages. And we obtained the answer that 50% of people think that they are bilingual. Then the next question that we asked was about the native language. We should single out that the term native language in Ukrainian we have рідна мова, doesn't exist in all languages. In English, sometimes, or maybe in most cases, we use mother tongue. You're speaking about the native language. In Polish, native language is connected with the language of the father. Yeah, and there is a term of język ojczysty. Sorry for my mispronouncing the term. And so their young students were asked, yes, about their native language. So, do you have one native language, two native languages, or more than two native languages? And we got the answer that 58% say that they have one mother tongue. It means that still one language is dominant. 25% say that they have two native languages. Then one more question was connected also with native language, because what language do you consider your native language? And you see majority of students think that their native language still it is the language of their mothers, and only 8% think that this language is connected with the language with their father's language. Then for us as for linguists, the language proficiency, yes, is important, but 25% of respondents think that their language proficiency is at the same level in two languages. 42% said that they know both languages approximately at the same level. So it shows that people in our case, the students, know two languages rather well. And being asked whether they are considered themselves to be completely bilingual, 58% answered yes. So they consider themselves to be completely bilingual. 42% said that they are almost bilingual, and no one answered that he or she is double semilingual. If although students consider themselves to be bilingual, it is not easy to translate for them from one language to another. Only 25% have no problems with translation. 50% can translate easily into native language, and only 9% can translate easily into a second language. And the last question that we were interested in